notebook? Why is the notebook like this? Show me the previous page. What was the last topic we were discussing? Process of digestion we are already finished. Absorption, assimilation we are already done.
And we have this process of digestion, the 9 steps.
That is already done. And starch test already we had discussed earlier. So we are already done with the concept of digestion. We are already done with the concept of nutrition. So now the basic concept of nutrition. Let us answer a few questions so at least you are aware. Look into your volume there. Nutrition. Turn to that chapter, life process. Previous board questions. Look into those questions there. Page. I think we did also some questions. Did we do some questions? Page 156. Did we do some questions from there? Check your books, all of you. Do you have your volume, all of you?
Yes.
Take out your volume. Turn to page 156. Page 156, nutrition. Question number 1. Can you see there? Question number 1 under nutrition, page 156. What do we actually mean when we say that the enzymes are specific in their action? Did we write this answer earlier?
No.
Take this question. Take out your notebooks. Write down. What do we actually mean when we say that enzymes are specific in their action? When we say that enzymes are specific in their action. Answer. Enzymes are specific in their action. Enzymes are specific in their action as enzymes are specific in their action as every specific enzyme acts on a specific substrate. Acts on a specific substrate.
Can you repeat after the action?
What did I say? Repeat the lines.
The enzymes are specific in their action.
As every specific enzyme acts on a specific substrate. Acts on a specific substrate. To break them down to certain simpler forms.
And one substrate have an S.
Substrate, correct. Substrate, full stop. For example, simpler. What did I say? Simpler forms. Full stop. Next line. For example, complex proteins in the stomach are broken down by pepsin. Complex proteins in the stomach are broken down by pepsin to peptones. Full stop. But peptones which are partially digested proteins will be further broken down by trypsin and not pepsin. Will be further broken down by trypsin and not pepsin.
And what is that the partially?
Partially digested proteins will be broken down by trypsin and not pepsin. Did you understand what you have written? The question is asking that how can we say that enzymes are very specific in their action and not pepsin? And not pepsin. Now, what are you writing? For an example, you can write any of the examples out of those 9 chemical equations that you have written down. I have picked up this example. You can pick up any other example also. Say suppose, what is the meaning of this concept? The meaning is if it is a type of a food stuff. I talk about proteins in the stomach also. I talk about proteins in the duodenum also. I talk about proteins in the later part of the intestine also. But are we understanding that the same enzyme can act on the 3 different forms of protein? Not at all. The forms of protein, as they are different, the type of enzymes also have to be absolutely different. That is the meaning that enzymes are specific. It is something like the lock and the key. For every particular lock, there's a specific key only. So when we are talking about the action of an enzyme on a substrate, meaning here the word substrate refers to what type of nutrient we are talking about, which has to be broken down. You can pick up examples to write about the different stages of fat digestion, about the different stages of carbohydrate digestion also. This is a simpler example always to remember that if I talk about the protein in the stomach, it can be pepsin. But if I talk about protein in the intestine, the duodenum, can this be pepsin now? Can the enzyme be pepsin now? Now the enzyme cannot be pepsin because the form of the substrate is different. Since the form of the substrate is different, the enzyme also have to be different. I talk about in the duodenum, the form of the the form of the protein is different, so enzyme is trypsin. Later, as the form of the protein again changes, but in the duodenum, trypsin is still present. Can I say that peptides are acted upon by the trypsin? No. The moment I talk about peptides, it has to be something else. Every time the substrate is different, the enzyme is always different. So this is what you are supposed to understand. Next, look into the next page, page 157. Page 157, what is the role of the hydrochloric acid in the stomach?
Ma'am, just one simple doubt. What do you exactly mean by substrate?
Any particular chemical compound. You have learned in chemistry also, I suppose. What is the role of hydrochloric acid in stomach? What did we study here? What is the role of hydrochloric acid?
To kill the germs and activate.
To kill the germs, that would be the last point to mention. What is the most important point? Hydrochloric, that question we had already. What is that? Activation of pepsinogen to form pepsin. What else? Acidic medium for proteins. For the digestion of proteins. Maintain acidic medium for the digestion of protein. That is an important point you will mention. Only 1 mark question it is. Should I write kills the germs? That's not a very important function to mention. What is the role of hydrochloric acid in the stomach? Only 1 mark, 1 point to write or 2 points to write majorly. Which point am I writing? I'm first of all mentioning the conversion of pepsinogen to pepsin. Then I'm mentioning the maintenance of the acidic medium and then favoring the process of protein digestion action on pepsin. That is the second point. If it is a 2 mark question and I'm writing the third point also, then I write about the killing of the germs. Killing of the microbes is not a very important point to write. Because why I say it is not a very important point? Because the saliva is also doing the same job. It is not the hydrochloric acid only doing that type of a job, because there are many other secretions doing the similar job in the alimentary canal. Then next is we are talking about, look into the next set of questions, page 157. Page 157, question number 2, we had already discussed. So I hope you'll be able to answer this type of a question. Question number 2, page this one. Long answer type. Long answer type. 5-mark question. Check there. Long answer type. 5-mark question. Tick question number 2. Tick question number 2. Tick question number 2. Then question number 4. Now, question number 2 and question number 4, tick these 2 questions. This remains as homework. The next day, you should show me properly written in your notebook. 1 minute, I'll give you that right now. And that's it. So now, from question page number 157, question number 2, question number 4, long answer questions. Now, if you go to question number 4 there, can you see it's mentioned the factors? We've already discussed the factors. I'm done. We discussed the factors which control the rate of photosynthesis. Which were the factors we studied? Sunlight.
Water.
With the sunlight, with the increase in sunlight, the rate of photosynthesis increases or decreases? Increases. The rate of sunlight, the higher the intensity of sunlight, the strength of the sunlight, higher is the rate of photosynthesis. With temperature? No. Higher the temperature, higher the rate of photosynthesis. But actually, you have not studied that content. We did not study here. That's not there in your syllabus. After a particular temperature, then the decrease. That is sure. After 40 degrees centigrade only, the decrease. But that much is not there for you. The general concept only, if I have to tell you, with increase in temperature, the rate of photosynthesis increases. What was the third?
Water.
The water content in the leaf cells. The leaf cells. So what will it be with the water content in the leaf cells?
It requires very less amount of water for photosynthesis.
With the water content,
About
adequate
1%.
amount of water content. About 1% of water. From where did you read all these things? Don't write any unnecessary answers. Now, when we are talking about the water, what did we study? With the adequate amount of water. So higher the amount of water content, adequate the amount of water content, then only the process of photosynthesis is adequate. So here also there is a direct relation. Higher the amount of water, higher the rate of photosynthesis. What is the last? 4 factors we are talking about. Carbon dioxide. Now the 4th point, carbon dioxide. For carbon dioxide, what it is?
what if कि अगर अर्थ पे ऐसी प्लेस है जहाँ पे सनलाइट पड़ती रहेगी तो फोटोसिंथेसिस कंटिन्यू चलता रहेगा.
Something like, say, suppose if I talk about the desert-like conditions, or I talk about conditions where the intensity of sunlight is very high, long duration of sunlight. Possible hai. Then what? These leaves or these plants, they have got specialized adaptive features. Unke jo stomata hai, these are not on the surface of the leaf. They are hidden stomata, and the opening closure is bit different. So the process of photosynthesis there also, when we are talking about for those plants also, are we understanding that those plants are undergoing the process of photosynthesis almost for 20 hours of the day? Maybe not. For a particular period, till the particular temperature, as I said, as the temperature for those places, if the temperature is above 40 degree, that has nothing to do with the role of with the process of photosynthesis, stomata will close down. As long as the temperature is 35 to 38, then only the process of photosynthesis happens.
If the plant proper sunlight and everything, like 24/7, we give them water and everything, so they will just continue the process of photosynthesis.
If we are able to provide adequate the right temperature. Now see, as I mentioned, that we are actually only studying the basic factors which can bring about the change in the process. But each of these factors that we understand, each of these factors are actually known as limiting factors. हर एक factor में एक level तक ही वो process increase हो रहा है. I talk about temperature. एक level तक ही temperature process को favor कर रहा है. After that particular temperature, process को stop कर देता है. That is always. Intensity.
No, I'm just saying that will it continue for 7 days and non-stop?
If we are able to maintain the temperature, maintain the humidity, maintain the carbon dioxide content, then yes.
So I must won't get like tired or anything.
The plant doesn't get tired like us. But that is not possible. That is not possible because the environmental conditions every 5 minutes it is changing. Every minute it is changing rather. Talk about the carbon dioxide concentration now and the carbon dioxide concentration at 1 o'clock. Absolutely different. Carbon dioxide concentration at 1 o'clock and 5 o'clock absolutely different. So the rate of photosynthesis is not the same, always fluctuating. And the moment the intensity of sunlight down, as it is, the process is almost stopped. So we had already talked about process of photosynthesis. We had already talked about the different phases. Where does light phase of reactions happen? Where does the light reaction stages happen in photosynthesis? Put your hand up. Where does the light phase happen? Next, just prompt revision, two, 3 questions. Keep reading, keep reading. Where does the light set of reactions happen? Light reaction. What is the site of light reactions in photosynthesis? What did we study? Next. What is chlorophyll? How will you define chlorophyll? No? Plants? What is chlorophyll? Define chlorophyll. Produced by the chloroplast. And what is its role? What did we study? I have given you that answer also, I think. Define chlorophyll. What is the job of chlorophyll?
It helps in photosynthesis and also
वो तो 600 के बच्चों को ही पता है. Chlorophyll photosynthesis में ही help होता है. What is the job that you have studied? What extra did you study in the 10th standard? What did we study? Trapping of sunlight. I gave you that answer also. What is the function of chlorophyll? Remember what to write as your answers. What is chlorophyll? What is the function of chlorophyll? What is chlorophyll? Chlorophyll is the green colored photosynthetic pigment. What is its function? Trap sunlight or solar energy. Chloroplast and chlorophyll I gave you also. I think I gave you that answer. Difference between chloroplast and chlorophyll. That is one very important to remember. That type of question you get. Next is the overall chemical equation of photosynthesis. All of you should know that very nicely. How is oxygen released during the process of photosynthesis? How is oxygen released? Is not opening, closing of stomata. We are not talking about the process diffusion. How is oxygen released? By what process is oxygen released? There's a particular concept we have studied. Do you remember? कौन से process से oxygen release हो रहा है? एक particular process था. What is that? Super. यहाँ पे आना बंद करो तुम लोग जिनको पढ़ना नहीं है आना बंद करो हमारा भी time waste नहीं करो. What was that? Remember we had studied one step, the events of photosynthesis. Separately I had explained you in the light set of reactions. One particular step which helps in the release of oxygen. What is that step?
Photolysis.
बाकी सबके डिक्शनरी में है कि नहीं है? देखो. तुम लोग never mind. You are coming here for all the fun. You will make a whole lot of friends. सारे आसपास के सारे shops के sandwich, chips, juices सब खत्म होगा. But then see that your marks in the report card increases.
What is photolysis?
What is photolysis? Don't ask me now. What is photolysis? Who will tell me now that answer? बताओ.
Separation of water molecules.
Separation.
splitting of water molecule to form
Splitting.
hydrogen and oxygen.
Splitting of water molecule. Did not we do this concept?
Yes, ma'am.
तो पढ़ेगा कौन? In the month of May, in this heat, you are coming and enjoying bottles and bottles of juice and chips. सब खत्म हो रहा है. पढ़ेगा कौन? 10th standard now. वो realize कर रहे हो तुम लोग कि you have to sit for an exam where your teachers will not be correcting your papers. Are you realizing that? Teachers को gifts और chocolates देके तुमको marks कुछ भी मिलने वाला नहीं है. Are you realizing that? Yes. तो इसके लिए क्या करना है? Next week I'm going to take a test, a short test on 10 marks. The entire concept on nutrition, study and come. Photosynthesis, human nutrition, digestive system, alimentary canal, all the concepts, read and come. I will take a short test. 15 minutes, I will take a short test and that report will go to Veena ma'am as well as your parents, how much you are getting in the test. We start with the next part. We are going to start with respiration. Now, after the concept of nutrition, what did we study? After the concept of nutrition, digestion is taking place where? In which part of the alimentary canal digestion is taking place? Digestion is taking place in the small intestine. Digestion is completed in the small intestine. Which part of the small intestine carries out the process of absorption? No. Which part of the small intestine carries out the process of absorption? Ileum. The last part of the small intestine. The last part of the small intestine carries out the process of absorption. What was so special about that part?
It had finger-like projections.
It had finger-like projections, numerous finger-like projections known as villi, and the villi had thin wall and
it has
large number of
Blood
blood vessels. So ये दो features के वजह से the process of absorption could have easily happened there. अब absorption के बाद now the blood surrounding the villus is loaded with the nutrients. So if I start with the concept of that villus again to go to the next topic, we are now understanding that at this particular villus a process known as absorption had happened. What did I tell you? What is the concept of absorption? Absorption means we are talking about a whole lot of diffusion of the molecules, large number of molecules, and these molecules which can be the simplest form of carbohydrate, protein and fat digestion. What is the simplest form of fats we had studied? Fatty acids. Simplest form of protein? Amino acids. And simplest form of carbohydrates to understand glucose. Now these molecules as they diffuse and get in, that is what we are talking about as absorption. Is absorption a simple process of diffusion? Yes. Absorption is nothing but a simple process of diffusion. But now I am to understand what next. What about this blood vessel? And this blood vessel is carrying all these molecules. Now this blood vessel is carrying all these molecules and this blood vessel passes through a large number of body cells, body tissues. So what will happen to these molecules, the fatty acids, by the body cells? So this blood vessel, the blood vessel also has got the same property like the thin wall and the process of diffusion they are capable of. So now these molecules of amino acids or fatty acids or glucose, they are entering into these body cells. They are entering into these body cells. Now that they enter into these body cells, talk about one particular cell here. If I talk about one particular cell here and I only understand that these glucose molecules have entered by the process of absorption and assimilation, then what should be the fate of these glucose molecules? These glucose molecules now have to be broken down because we are ultimately using or we are ultimately consuming all these different forms of nutrients to get energy. Or so that our body cells are able to absorb all the nutrients in the form of amino acids or fatty acids or glucose. Now let me just talk about glucose for the time being. I'm saying now that the body cells got glucose, what next? The glucose has to be broken down. But for the breakdown of glucose, what else is necessary for the breakdown of glucose? Oxygen is very much necessary. And here comes the concept of respiration that we are going to understand next. That in the body cells, how would the oxygen enter? The glucose is already entered by the method of assimilation. Now, how would the oxygen enter? To understand how the oxygen enters, you will listen first. Now, don't interrupt like this when I'm teaching. Now, when we are talking about oxygen, now that the oxygen is entering, how the oxygen enters, that's an elaborate process altogether. How does the oxygen enter? This is a separate concept that we are going to study now, and that is what is respiration. But then how are we going to write down the definition of respiration? What could be the definition of respiration? What is the breakdown? What is the process of respiration? Simply the breakdown of glucose. You can answer without raising your hand also every time. It's very irritating. Put down your hand. Now, when we are talking about this, now that you are in the higher classes, every time you don't have to raise your hand this way. Answer no without raising your hand. Now, when we are talking about the glucose molecules to be broken down, the glucose molecules broken down to release what? But
carbon dioxide.
nahin? Apart from carbon dioxide, what?
Energy.
Energy. Why do we consume carbohydrate? Get energy. Why are we consuming carbohydrate? To get energy. We are consuming carbohydrate not to release carbon dioxide. We are consuming carbohydrate to get energy. Yes, in that process, carbon dioxide is a byproduct. What was the byproduct in photosynthesis?
Oxygen.
What was the byproduct in the process of photosynthesis? Nay?
Oxygen.
Oxygen. The byproduct was oxygen. Yeah, now that we talk about respiration. So we now start talking about respiration. What is respiration? A process by which glucose is getting broken down to release carbon dioxide, water, and a whole lot of energy. But the energy in what form? Energy majorly in the form of ATP and little bit in the form of body heat. Majorly in the form of ATP. What is the full form of ATP? Adenosine triphosphate. Released by which organelle? Mitochondria. So now all these references we'll have to study now.
Ma'am, could you repeat the definition?
I'll tell you. So now that we talk about the concept of respiration, so let us now start. What is respiration? What are the different forms? The different modes, overall chemical equation. So we start with the concept of respiration. And we start with the definition of respiration, the overall chemical equation you will write down. What is the definition of respiration? Write down the biochemical process. The biochemical process in which food is, the biochemical process, right? A new head, respiration. This is the next part of the chapter that we are starting. Respiration, the biochemical process in which food, biochemical process in which food, within bracket you will write glucose. The biochemical process in which food, within bracket glucose, is broken down in the presence of oxygen. In the presence of oxygen to release carbon dioxide, water, and ATP. Your answer should be specific, mentioning everything in the correct way. I repeat again, respiration definition, what should you write? The biochemical process in which food, glucose, majorly we consider glucose. There are other forms also. Food, within bracket, glucose is broken down in the presence of oxygen to release or give rise to carbon dioxide, water, and energy. Write down the overall chemical equation. What you wrote?
A process by which glucose is broken down in the form of ATP molecules and many byproducts like carbon dioxide, oxygen, and water are released.
To produce ATP molecules. No, that is not the typical answer that you should write, because to release energy in the form of ATP and carbon dioxide and water, because energy is also released in the form of heat. So you cannot just write release ATP molecules. You have to write release energy in the form of ATP. Heat we basically don't mention. You can mention. Basically we don't mention because heat is a smaller fraction. ATP is the larger fraction. So now we are talking about 6 molecules of carbon dioxide. Write down the overall chemical equation, all of you. Carbon dioxide, 6 molecules of water, and ATP, a large amount of ATP that we understand. Within bracket, down there, put a star, and please remember what is the full form of ATP. You are asked that also. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. I suppose all of you know the correct spelling. Check it out again. Adenosine triphosphate. adenosine triphosphate. That is the overall chemical equation. Now that we are talking about the concept of respiration here, let us try first of all understanding that what would be a major difference between the terrestrial organisms and the aquatic organisms. If I talk about now this as I start, so I'm just trying to understand what would be a basic difference between them.
Presence of lung and
Gills, correct. What else?
How they
Take in the oxygen. Okay, something
presence of
more.
osmosis and
Diffusion. Now here no osmosis, only diffusion. Here we are only talking about diffusion. Now, what are some of the major features you are supposed to remember? You have got a short paragraph on this concept in your textbook when you read. What are we majorly understanding? We are trying to find out a difference between what is the advantage that a terrestrial organism enjoys in comparison to a aquatic organism. What is that? If I talk about a terrestrial organism, try to understand what are some of the features. I talk about a terrestrial organism. Number one, we have got a developed respiratory system. We have got the respiratory tubes and then the elaborate lungs and the blood vessels, everything. What about the aquatic organism? Think about the fishes. What about the aquatic organism? In case of the aquatic organism, gills. Are the structures, gills, as developed as the lungs we have? Not that much. Because if I talk about the tube-like structures, they don't have anything. And third point is, when we are talking about the amount of oxygen that we are exposed to, we being a terrestrial group of organism, we are exposed to a larger amount of oxygen as compared to the fish in the water, which is exposed to a very small amount of oxygen surrounding. Meaning, I talk about the amount of oxygen dissolved in the water and the amount of oxygen in the air. If I compare, where is oxygen more? Oxygen is always more in the air. Always more in the air. Oxygen in the water, that is always known as dissolved oxygen. Dissolved oxygen always much lesser in the water. Meaning, say suppose I compare 1 ml of air and 1 ml of water. Where is oxygen more? Where is the proportion of oxygen more? Always air. If I ask you what is the percentage proportion of oxygen in the air?
20% in
21. 21% in the air, not 1% in the water. 21% in the 21 approximately 21% in the air. But in comparison, if I have to talk about the water, in the water, it is roughly around 2 to 3%, much lesser. So what am I saying? Are we able to measure volume by volume, air and water? Yes, we can. Volume by volume, take 4 ml of air, 4 ml of water. 1 ml of air, 1 ml of water. And every time, we are always convinced that the amount of oxygen in the air is much more. So if that is true, can you tell me how are we in a advantageous situation?
because
हमारे आसपास जो air है, the oxygen is much more. Then how are we in a better advantageous situation?
because absorption of oxygen
Becomes easier, and
we have a
we have a well-developed respiratory system. So at one breath, we are taking in a large amount of oxygen. At one breath, at one time, at one particular period of time, we are taking in a large amount of oxygen. So the energy consumption is much less. Stand up, both of you. Give that notebook. Give that notebook straight away. Bring it here. Bring it here. Bring that notebook here right now. Yes. What is going on?
Nothing I actually wrote. I thought I missed something. So
Is it so?
That's not-
My dear darling, understand. Kafi saal baad, I was also a student sitting here. Give the book here. Should I put you out of the class? Should I put you out of the class? Should I put you out of the class? Concentrate in the class. Otherwise, any time I'll put you outside the classroom. If you're not worth, put the notebook. Now, when we are talking about this, now let us try understanding what is the difference. There's a particular question that you have to answer. And what is this? how are terrestrial organisms in a more advantageous condition as compared to aquatic organism? What is the answer that you write? The terrestrial organisms are exposed to a higher amount of oxygen. Remember the points, I'll give you that answer. The terrestrial organisms are exposed to a higher amount of oxygen. So at one particular breath, we take in a large amount of oxygen. Comparatively, if I talk about a fish in the water, talk about the bigger fishes also. Did you ever see the operculum part of the fish? The head part of the fish that we understand. The head part on the lateral sides, there are some fan-shaped structures. And these fan-shaped structures, if at all you have observed some moderate-sized fish in the aquarium also, you will notice that the operculum is moving every now and then, every now and then, every now and then. And so much of water has to rush in, so much of water has to rush in. And if I understand that at one particular period of time, if we terrestrial organisms are able to get in a large amount of oxygen, comparatively they are getting a very, very small amount of oxygen because the amount of oxygen dissolved in the water is much, much less. So now, again, how are we in an advantageous situation? Because with the little bit of expenditure of energy, we are able to get so much of oxygen. And the same fish there, of a much lesser body weight, much smaller size than us, has to spend so much of energy flipping and rushing the water, has to spend so much of energy to get that small amount of oxygen. What is the reason? The amount of dissolved oxygen much lesser. So the answer always is that for any particular aquatic organism, they have to spend so much of energy to supply or to satisfy their oxygen demand of the body. And for us, in a small period of time, shorter period of time, we can take in a large amount of oxygen. Now, if we take in a large amount of oxygen, so obviously the amount of energy release is also much more. The process of glucose breakdown is also more efficient. The release of energy also much more. And that's the reason we are able to carry out all the various different type of activities. We'll take one question. It is there in your textbook itself. You will see that question there. Write down that question. It is in the textbook. It's a textbook question. Write down. Let us start with that.
Ma'am, you want to give any points on the terrestrial organism?
I will give that answer only now first, and then we are going to start. Look into page. Those of you have the textbook, page 91. You may write down that question. Others, I will dictate. Write down. What advantage over? Write down fast. Page 91. If you all have the textbook, page 91, the first question. What advantage over an aquatic organism? What advantage over an aquatic organism does a terrestrial organism have? Does what advantage over an aquatic organism? What advantage over an aquatic organism does a terrestrial organism have with regard to obtaining oxygen? Did you write? I have the. Are you writing down the question in the notebook? Look at him. What advantage over an aquatic organism does a terrestrial organism have with regard to obtaining oxygen for respiration? Obtaining oxygen for respiration. Did you understand that question? What is the advantage of an aquatic organism? What is the advantage of a terrestrial organism over an aquatic organism? We will write down. What are the points we have to write? Number one, more amount of oxygen in the air. Number two, lesser supply of, lesser amount of energy utilized for a higher supply of oxygen. These 2 points we'll write. Write down the answer there. Remember, we are talking about a comparison between your book. Why did you give your book to your darling friend? Huh? Now you both have to compromise. See, no nonsense in my class. No nonsense in my class. We are constantly singing the songs right from 7 o'clock in the morning. So no nonsense absolutely in the classes. If you want his book to be written, then you'll have to give me a book. Keep sitting there. Watch the show. Write down. The answer, right? Atmospheric, first point. Atmospheric air has a higher proportion of oxygen. Atmospheric air has a higher proportion of oxygen. You deserve to miss certain things. Atmospheric air has a higher proportion of oxygen as compared to the oxygen dissolved, as compared to the oxygen dissolved in the water. Full stop. Full stop. Second point. Also, the breathing rate of aquatic organisms are comparatively much higher than terrestrial organisms.
Are much higher than
Terrestrial organisms. Now, did you get these 2 points, all of you?
Yes.
So what are the 2 points you are writing? Number 1, atmospheric air has a higher amount of oxygen as compared to water. What is the second point? The breathing rate of aquatic organisms much higher. For example, if I compare between human and some other aquatic organism, say suppose I talk about human. What is the breathing rate of human? Are you aware? In a minute. Nahin? 7 to 2 nahin? How many number of times we breathe per minute? 24 to 30 times. We breathe, that's the normal. 72 मतलब तब तो हमें hospital में रहना पड़ेगा. So when we are talking about 24 to 30 times. So now see, 24 to 30 times in a minute. Are we able to understand anything? Are nostrils moving? कहाँ पे? Nostrils moving, ear moving, nothing. But talk about a fish, you can understand. So number of times that operculum keeps on moving. If I compare human with a moderate sized fish also, the breathing rate of the moderate sized fish is much more than 50 to 60 times per minute. For us, 24 to 30 times.
So the required oxygen per time is more than human requirement.
The requirement of oxygen is not more, but to get that 1 ml of oxygen, they have to do so much of work. And for us, doing that small amount of work, we can get so much of oxygen. That is the advantage we are getting. Understanding or not? So these are the 2 points you wrote. Now just one more, a couple of lines to write. Write down. How can you write with the same pen? My God, one after the other in this class. Ink khatam ho gaya, to tum abhi 2 line tum likhoge, 4 line wo likhega. So do you expect me to keep teaching this topic for the next 5 hours? तो पूछो ना किसी को पेन के लिए. कोई नहीं दे रहा. तो अभी कहाँ है पेन? Okay, now the last point, let us complete that answer. After writing the 2 points, right? Thus, terrestrial or ये हो गया. अभी last paragraph लिखो. Thus, terrestrial organisms. Your teachers never give any dictation in the class.
I will send the PDF of the answer and then we have to write it out. They sometimes random answers are dictated in the class itself.
They dictate, no, sometimes.
Not for
Opinion.
us, not for us. A lot of us.
Okay, chalo likho. Thus, what do you wrote? Thus, terrestrial organisms need to utilize a less amount of energy to satisfy the oxygen demand in comparison.
To satisfy.
The oxygen demand in comparison to any aquatic organism, in comparison to any aquatic organism which has a higher breathing rate, aquatic organism which has a higher breathing rate and energy lost to obtain a small amount of oxygen. To obtain a small amount of oxygen. Got this? So this is the first concept that we understand, that what is when we are talking about the aquatic and the terrestrial organisms. Now, next is when we are coming across the concept of respiration, we are first of all trying to understand that what would be the basic requisite for an organism to show the process of respiration. Here we have to understand that any organism which shows an elaborate method of respiration has to have elaborate respiratory system. We are going to come across now the basic concept of respiratory system in human. What are the parts, what are the functions we are going to come across? Bolo.
Ma'am, in this topic, the terrestrial and aquatic one, like you said that like aquatic animals have less oxygen and that's why they have
Aquatic animals less oxygen nahi, water में oxygen dissolved कम है. So that's the reason any aquatic organism you talk about, that organism is breathing more number of times as compared we do.
yes.
In 1 minute, what I told you, if we are breathing 24 to 30 times, that moderate sized fish in the water is breathing 50 to 60 times. So that fish is spending more amount of energy to get that small amount of oxygen.
Yes.
And we are getting it just at one breath. So energy consumption किसका ज़्यादा हुआ? हमारा कि उसका? Fish का ज़्यादा हुआ. So are we advantageous in a better situation? Yes, we are.
I just wanted to ask that if we remove a fish from water, then it has abundant oxygen, right? So then why does it die rather than
How? If I put you in the water, will you be able to survive very nicely? No, because our respiratory organs are not accustomed to the oxygen absorption from water. I talk about the fish. Take out the fish. Is the fish happy to get so much of air and so much of oxygen? No, the body is not accustomed to take that oxygen. It is not
design?
the body is not designed. Absolutely, the body is not designed. So when we are in the water, our body is not designed. So that's the reason we need extra air to take in oxygen. So now we are talking about the respiratory organs in human. We start with this, the respiratory system in human. Those of you are having the textbook, you will also refer to the diagram in the textbook. What are the respiratory organs? What are their functions and certain specific definitions that we are going to come across? Respiratory organ, now we understand that after the basic concept of what is respiration, we are going to talk about the respiratory organs. Which are the respiratory organs and what are their functions? We start with, the first is nostrils. Next is we talk about the nasal passage. The set of respiratory organs, the nasal passage, Then we talk about the pharynx. Next is the larynx. We talk about the trachea, and after the trachea, we talk about the bronchi or the bronchus, followed by the nostrils, nasal passages, pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchi, and then we talk about the bronchioles and the lungs. See there, the same arrangement of the. Who is talking? If you want to talk, I can open the door for you. This is not your school, remember. The last two I'm going to separate. Give me one more reason. Concentrate. We are talking about the bronchi. We are talking about the bronchioles. Specific functions for each we'll have to remember. And then we talk about the lungs. Now, these are the set of organs that we are talking about. Respiratory system in human. Which are the organs? See there also in the figure. Which are the organs? Now that we talk about the organs and what are their functions, one or two functions for each, you are supposed to remember. I talk about the nostrils. What would be the function of the nostrils? Inhalation, taking in of air. Now, when we are talking about taking in of air, remember the air that we take in quite a number of times may be colder than our body, right? Now that as we talk about AC room also, we talk about we visit some cold places or people in cold places. Every time do they suffer from cough, cold, fever? No, they don't suffer from cold or cough every time. Why? Because the nasal passage has the ability to warm the air if it is cooler than the body. So what is the basic function when we are talking about the nasal passage? Always remember, first of all, when we are looking into the function of the nostrils, what is the basic function of the nostrils, special characteristics of the nostrils? The nostrils basically carry out the process of inhalation. Any special feature of the nostrils to understand? The nostrils have got one specialized layer of cells, and this is known as the ciliated epithelium. Do you remember this? It's a type of epithelial tissues that we have studied, ciliated epithelium, which has got fine hair-like structures known as the cilia. The ciliated epithelium. Now the nasal passage is this particular region that we are talking about. What are two prominent functions when we talk about the nasal passages? This nasal passage that we understand has got one or two major functions to perform. I just now told you that quite a number of times we also visit cold places. We are not accustomed to such cool temperatures. But yes, we may generally suffer from cough, cold, but not always. But how does our body get accustomed? We are sitting in an AC room. Every day we are of course not suffering from cough, cold. How does our body get accustomed? Now that we are inhaling the air is actually cooler than our body temperature. What is our body temperature?
36.
98.6 degree Fahrenheit or 37 degrees centigrade. So now that we are talking about 37, and what is the temperature of this room now? 24, 22. So is the temperature of the air that we are inhaling much lesser than our body temperature? Yes. Then how is our body getting accustomed to this cool air? The nasal passage is constantly making the air that we inhale warmer before it takes in. The nasal passage always helps in making the air warm. So what is the basic function? Makes the inhaled air warm. Makes the inhaled air warm as well as moist. Warm and moist also if the air is extremely dry. So these are the basic functions. Pharynx, what is pharynx now? Already you know the basic concept of esophagus. What was esophagus?
Passage of
Food pipe. Now, talk about the food pipe and the windpipe, the trachea. Where are they? If this is the trachea, the food pipe is just at the back of it. Now, if you run down your fingers here, are you able to sense the food pipe or the windpipe? Windpipe. So, this tube that we are able to sense is actually the windpipe with all the dents and the elevation that you can understand. And just at the back of it is the food pipe. But if I move here, if I just poke my finger deep inside, which part am I talking about? I am talking about the pharynx. This is a wider space, and through this space, the inhaled air also passing and the food also passing. So it is something like this. The inhaled air moves and comes in the front, and the food moves and goes at the back. Why? Because the esophagus is just at the back of the trachea. The trachea is in the front and the esophagus at the back. So what I told you just now, the inhaled air comes through the pharynx and moves in the front, and the food goes through the pharynx and goes at the back to enter the food pipe. So this particular pharynx is actually split into two tubes. This is split into two tubes. The front tube is known as the trachea. The tube at the back is known as the food pipe, the esophagus. What function do you write then for the pharynx? What function? Just now what I mentioned.
Separation of
It's a common passage for food and air. What is the function of the pharynx? Always we write. It's a common passage for food and air. It's a yes.
Another point for nasal passage.
Nasal passage, no. Warm and moist. These are the two parts that always we should write. Common passage for food and air. Common passage for food and air. Larynx, you must be knowing, all of you. बोलो ना ऐसे नहीं करो. Be smart enough. हाँ बोलो.
Ma'am, there is something like a flap thing, like in the ear only.
Larynx. When I talk about the larynx, see here. This entire larynx, we can feel this also. Here, it is up here. And it is, don't press too hard. Huh? Now that we are talking about this particular region, this is the larynx. And if you press little bit and you talk, the voice modulation is there. You can understand. Why? Because this is the larynx. This is the larynx. What type of a tissue it is made up of? Cartilage. Cartilage is what type of a tissue? Bone. Muscular. You were there here, no? Last year.
Connective.
Disgrace. Connective tissue. Correct. So when we are talking about cartilages are what type of tissues? Cartilages are connective tissues. They give framework to body parts. No? Where is cartilages present?
Miss knows.
Cartilage in the heart. From where did you learn all these things, my dear? Tip of the nose. और cartilage कहाँ पे रहता है? Joints. सब scientists बैठे हैं इस क्लास में. Joints में रहता है the pinna of the ear, the tip of the nose, all the joints. Between any two bones, cartilages are always there. In the vertebral column, everywhere, wherever the joints are there. Tendons are fine fibrous tissues which are joining your bone with your muscle. Cartilages, no, not bone with bone. Ligament and tendons are comparable. Cartilage and tendons are not comparable. That is not comparable. 9th standard में 9 से 10 आए कैसे? हाँ? ये चैप्टर स्किप करके. बायो पूरा स्किप किया था. टिश्यू चैप्टर नहीं कराया. आज क्वेश्चंस आए नहीं.
फाइनल तक भी मैम ने थोड़ा भी
यहाँ पे तुम लोग इतना बोल रहे हो, स्कूल में कुछ बोला नहीं था.
आपको पता नहीं हमारी बायोलॉजी कैसी.
वो तो मेरे लिए नहीं बोलो. क्या एक्सप्लेन करने लग गए वहाँ पे.
पढ़ा नहीं रही है वो. अरे इसकी क्लास टीचर है.
जो पढ़ा नहीं रहे हो, जो पढ़ा रहे हो तुम सुन तो नहीं रहे हो. सेम क्लास है. क्वेश्चन मैं पूछने वाली हूँ अभी. मॉक टेस्ट एक के बाद एक मैं लेने वाली हूँ. बायो टेस्ट विल कम अक्रॉस once I finish with respiration. Respiration खत्म होते ही will get the first bio test. देना. वो बाद में होगा ये दो पार्ट पहले
अच्छा पहले दो पार्ट में दो
ओके ओके डन हो गया now let us talk about this larynx. What I told you, remember larynx is what? It is a cartilaginous box. It is also known as a cartilaginous box. Boys box bhi bolte hain isko. So now when I talk about cartilage you can understand, get an idea that the structure is something like the ear structure that you have. It is not very rigid and not very soft. Partially it is flexible also. So when we are talking about this particular structure, it is a box-like structure here, but inside the box-like structure there are hundreds and hundreds of fine fiber-like structures. Inside this entire box-like structure here, there are hundreds and hundreds of fiber-like structures. Background music देने की जरूरत नहीं है बिल्कुल भी. Now, these fine fiber-like structures which are there, as and when we are inhaling, the air passes through and the fibers keep on vibrating. They keep on vibrating and the production of the sound or the voice that we understand. So what is the other name for larynx? Also known as voice box. What is it known as? It is known as voice box. So what is the function that you write? Production of voice. That much only. Production of voice. तुम लिखो, तुम्हारा नोटबुक में चेक करने वाले आपके सामने.
How is this related to respiration?
How it is related to respiration? Is it not allowing the passage of the inhaled air? Yes, it is allowing the passage of inhaled air, but related to that, it is also bringing about the production of voice. Now we talk about the most important parts: the trachea, the bronchi, and the bronchioles. Now see here, I will ask you to write down the differences also. Trachea, bronchi, and the bronchioles. Check here. When I talk about the trachea, this is the entire tube-like structure known as the trachea. What is the trachea made up of? What are some special features of the trachea? Number one, I talk about the trachea, I talk about the bronchi and the bronchioles. All of them, they are made up of smooth muscles. So now, if I have to talk about these particular features, I would say that trachea, what is it made up of? It is made up of smooth muscles. Smooth muscles, to understand this also we have studied last year. If I ask you one functional property of the smooth muscles, what should you write? Functional bola na? Functional property, what should you write? They are involuntary. Involuntary. So this is same for the trachea, bronchi, bronchioles, all of them. Let me finish with the trachea first. So what is one special property of the trachea? They are made up of smooth muscles. Apart from that, they have a large number of rings all over. C-shaped cartilaginous rings. They have C-shaped cartilaginous rings. See there in the figure also, if you come across, they have got these type of rings all over. They have got this type of rings all over. Something that you can feel also. The C-shaped cartilaginous rings. Now, if I talk about this C-shaped cartilaginous rings, they again have a specific significance to perform. Now, this is the trachea. What now next? This trachea will start getting bifurcated. It starts getting bifurcated. Now that it gets bifurcated, it results in the formation of a series of tubes like this. This sequence of tubes, they have got specific names to understand. So I'm talking about that this entire trachea divides to form two tubes. First of all, I will name this as the bronchi. The bronchi, again into the first set, the second, the third. So they are constantly dividing in this manner. They are constantly dividing in this manner. From one particular tube, a large number of tubes would branch out. So I'm talking about, let us now start naming them properly. How do we name this? This particular tube is what we are talking about as trachea, remember. What do I name this as? This is, who is talking? एक और बार मैंने देखा ना सीधा बाहर कर. This one also. Yes. Now trachea, bronchus. But now this bronchial tubes, can you tell me what is the basic difference? One difference from the figure that you can easily understand, this is broad, this is narrow. One difference. What about these rings that I'm drawing? These rings are known as the C-shaped cartilaginous rings. What are these rings that we are talking about? These are the cartilaginous rings. We are going to understand what is their basic significance. The C-shaped cartilaginous rings, are they there on the bronchus? Yes, they are very much there on the bronchus also. But now that I talk about the bronchus, they are again constantly divided into a series of tubes, and they have got separate names for this. So I may say that these, instead of bronchus, let me just name them as primary bronchi. These are the primary bronchi. 1, 2. These are the tubes. What about this? This again divides into another set of tubes. So now I will say that these tubes are the secondary bronchi. Following or not?
Yes.
We talk about the secondary bronchi. But this secondary again divide into a number of tubes. So what are these tubes? We are going to term them as, these are known as the tertiary bronchi. Got that? Now this tertiary bronchi also, this tertiary bronchi is also dividing into this set of tubes. So what are these set of tubes now known as? This set of tubes will be termed as the bronchioles, and from every single bronchiole we are going to come across a knob-like structure that terminates, a knob-like structure that terminates, a knob-like structure that terminates. So now if I talk about this bronchiole, let me just label the bronchiole here. Now these are the bronchioles, and what are these membranous sac-like structures known as? These are known as alveolus. This entire structure, when we are drawing this entire structure which fills up like this, and this entire structure can be now termed as the lungs. This entire structure is the lungs that we understand. So this particular lung, what are some of the most important parts to understand? Trachea. Trachea divide to form a number of tubes. What are those set of tubes known as? Bronchi. Bronchi can be primary, secondary, tertiary. Tertiary bronchi will end up into the finest tubule. Which are the finest tubule to mention? Bronchioles. Bronchioles don't divide further. Bronchioles do not divide further, but they will all terminate into a small membranous air sac. And what is this membranous air sac known as? The alveolus. And every cluster of alveolus results in the formation of a lung. Now let us continue from here again. Trachea, smooth muscles. What about the bronchi? Anything different? No, these are also made up of smooth muscles. Bolo.
How do the C-shaped rings help in respiration?
So now when we are talking about the trachea and the bronchi, what is the similarity? Made up of smooth muscles, possesses C-shaped cartilaginous rings. Function, what would be the function? What do you think is the function of the trachea and the bronchi? The passage of air. Exchange nahi. Passage of air. Exchange is a different concept altogether. So what is the function you are writing? Write down the function of the trachea. What to write? Passage of air. The passage of air, the movement of air is happening both towards the lungs and out of the lungs. Okay. So now that I talk about the bronchi and the trachea, I want to write down the function. What should I write? The function is common. What is the common function? Passage of air. Now the air that I talk about can be the inhaled and the exhaled air both. But one difference to write trachea and bronchi, but that would be broader, narrower. Present in the upper region of the chest cavity, present in the lower region of the chest cavity. So majorly you are asked about one difference at times. Broader, and the trachea bifurcates to form bronchi. Yes or no? The trachea bifurcates to form the bronchi. I talk about the bronchioles. What are some of the basic characteristics to understand, to remember? These are the finest or the minutest tubules. Remember, these are the smallest tubules. These are the smallest, finest tubules. These are. And they terminate into what? They always terminate into the alveolus. They terminate into the alveolus. Always would terminate into the alveolus. Now we talk about the lungs. What is the lungs made up of? What are some special features of the lungs? To look into the characteristics of the lungs are spongy. The lungs are richly supplied with blood vessels. They are richly supplied with blood vessels. And when we are talking about the blood vessel supply, we have to understand that also. First of all, to understand what are some of the major features of the lungs. The lungs are spongy. Why are the lungs spongy? Because the lungs are made up of millions of air sacs. The lungs are not made up of any solid muscles or cartilages or bones at all. It is just made up of air-filled sacs. What are those air-filled sacs known as? Alveolus, plural alveoli. So what are the two special features of the lungs I'm mentioning? Number one, it is spongy, and number two, richly supplied with blood vessels. What is the basic color of the lungs generally understood?
Dark
Pinkish, because of the profuse supply of blood vessels there. Profuse supply of blood vessels. Structural, now we try understanding. What is the structural and functional unit of the lungs? The structural and functional unit of the lungs is known as alveolus. Write down that answer. Name the structural and functional unit of the lungs. Name the structural and functional unit of the lungs. Name the structural and functional unit of the lungs. Mention unit of the lungs. Name the structural and functional unit of the lungs. Full stop. Next part of the same question. Mention two specialized features. Mention two specialized features of this structure. Mention two specialized features of this structure. Now, what are you writing? Name the structural and functional unit. Now, what is the structural and functional unit I told you? It is the alveolus. Write down. The structural and functional unit of the lungs. The structural and functional unit of the lungs are alveolus. Got that? Next line. Two special features of the alveolus. Now to write down. Second part है. Second part मैंने क्या पूछा है? What are the special features of the alveolus? तो alveolus का special features क्या है? Now that I talk about each of these air sacs, what are these air sacs known as? Alveolus. Now we are going to understand next that what is exactly happening in the alveolus. Air is filling in, exchange of gases happening. So अगर exchange of gases has to happen at this region, this particular structures must be having some specialized features. And the specialized features are same like what you have studied for villus. What did you study for villus? What were the two specialized features of the villus? What did I ask you? पूछा तुम्हें? What are the two specialized features of the villus? ये तो specialized feature नहीं है. We had learned that. What are the two specialized features of the villus? दो features कौन-कौन से थे? Read. Nobody is studying.
The wall is thin and is covered with epithelial cells and this is rich in this be supplied with blood.
Reading भी फटाफट नहीं कर पा रहे. So now, yes. So what are the two specialized features? The two specialized features are a thin wall made up of अरे epidermal plant में होता है. A thin layer made up of single layer of epithelial cells and number two क्या था? Rich supply of blood vessels. Same यहाँ पे भी है. Hence, the process of diffusion is possible. Write down again and remember. Now, for the next part of the answer, write down two special features of alveolus are. Two special features of alveolus are number one. Two special features of alveolus are number one, a thin wall made of single layer of epithelial cells. Thin wall made of single layer of epithelial cells. Number two, rich supply of blood vessels. Rich supply of blood vessels. आया समझ में यहाँ तक? Any doubt, anybody? So what are we studying? We had been talking about what are the main parts of the respiratory system in human. So what are the main parts in a sequence to mention? What are the main parts in a sequence to mention? The nostrils, nasal passage, pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchi, bronchioles, lungs. When you are writing, alveolus are the units of the lungs. When you are writing down the organ, the last organ that you write is the lungs. But now, see there in the diagram also, at the base of the lungs, can you see there's a membranous sheet? And this membranous sheet is known as what? This membranous sheet is known as the diaphragm. What is the job of the diaphragm? Is this a part of the respiratory system? Yes, this is also a part of the respiratory system. Now, this diaphragm, certain conditions you'll have to remember. Now that I talk about the diaphragm, how is the diaphragm under relaxed conditions? What happens when we try taking in air and what happens when we try giving out air? This is a muscle, I told you just now, that it is a muscular sheet. If it is a muscular sheet, again, what type of muscle? Smooth muscles. When I say smooth muscles, I just now mentioned also that it is involuntary. Then what do you understand the meaning involuntary?
We cannot control it.
We cannot control, and the contraction and relaxation is absolutely as per the need of the body. So now, this particular diaphragm, if I understand that it is little bit curved always, under all regular conditions, little bit curved. When we try inhaling, what happens? It starts becoming flat. And when the lungs are filled with air, after some time it starts becoming curved like this. We are going to study this in the next part. So first of all, the parts of the respiratory system and the diaphragm also. To remember, the diaphragm very much helps in the process of the diaphragm very much helps in the process of respiration, inhalation, exhalation. We are going to understand. We were talking about the blood supply. Here we were talking about what? We were saying that alveolus, two special features of the alveolus are what? Thin wall and extensive supply of blood vessels. Now to understand that, here we have to come across that what are those specific blood vessels which are supplying blood to the lungs. I would start from the heart. The details you are going to study again in the next part of the chapter, but as of now, only the names of the vessels. Later, all the chambers and the specific route. So I start this way that when I talk about the heart, from one particular chamber of the heart, the blood comes out, and this particular blood which is now coming out from this particular chamber of the heart is deoxygenated. We are talking about deoxygenated blood. What is the meaning of deoxygenated blood?
No presence of oxygen.
Blood
Has no presence of oxygen.
Who told you this? Blood, what is deoxygenated? Deoxygenated means proportion of carbon dioxide is higher than proportion of oxygen. Always. But again, when I say proportion of carbon dioxide higher, can I say that proportion of carbon dioxide higher, you are saying, am I to understand that it is something around 80% to 20%? No. I may say, if it is deoxygenated blood, it is something around that it is 55% carbon dioxide and something around 40-45% oxygen. Remember, this type of a comparison only we are talking about. In our body, never it would happen that the proportion of carbon dioxide is in a ratio of 40-60 or 80-20. Never, never possible. The difference is only by 5 to 7 degrees, not more than that. 5 to 7%, not more than that. So if I talk about deoxygenated blood, we are going to talk about this in the next part of the chapter also, but you may write it down now also. Deoxygenated blood, what is the meaning? Put a star down there and write. Okay, first let us finish this, then we will write down. So the heart is carrying deoxygenated blood by what type of a vessel? By a vessel known as pulmonary artery. By a vessel known as pulmonary artery. Now, the blood carried by pulmonary artery, what is the type of the blood? The type of the blood is deoxygenated, already we mentioned. Now the blood enters into the lungs, and the blood, as it passes through the alveolus, the blood is now becoming oxygenated, becoming oxygen rich. It is becoming oxygenated. So what is this vessel which is bringing the blood away from the lungs? This is now known as pulmonary vein. What is the nature of the blood? The nature of the blood is oxygenated. Again, I mentioned the same. If I talk about oxygenated blood, then what is the difference to understand oxygen and carbon dioxide? Maybe I understand that something around 55-58% oxygen and something about 35-38% carbon dioxide. So only that much is the difference. Never a big difference to always understand. From by the way of the pulmonary vein. Now, what is the type of the blood carried by the pulmonary vein then? Oxygenated, pure blood. And this will be now, this pure blood will enter into the left chamber of the heart. We mentioned that as the left atrium right now. And the left atrium is as it is actually a part of the heart again. So, which are these vessels? Right now, you are only to remember this. The vessel that carry blood towards the lungs, what is the nature of the blood? The vessel that carry blood away from the lungs, and what is the nature of the blood? So what is happening in the lungs? A process known as oxygenation. A process known as oxygenation is happening in the lungs. And what is meant by oxygenation? We are going to study after the break. Oxygenation, we are going to study exchange of gases. This is your book, no? Don't touch this.
केमिस्ट्री भी नहीं आ रहा मुझे पता है तुम हम भी पढ़ते हैं रात पढ़ता है क्या चल रहा है?
अरे मीठे
अरे वो चल रहा है।
See, it doesn't matter. Chemistry का paper सबसे गंदा है। I'm not gonna see that paper again. कुछ भी
मैंने सोचा
मैंने पढ़ा 15 मिनट में वन शॉट देख के गया था।
अरे
तुमने वो मैंने किया था, मैंने वो भी नहीं किया। ये कितना गंदा लग रहा है। तूने क्या पढ़ा? तूने
एक चल रहा है मीटिंग बंद नहीं
ऐसे कर देते
ओए लग गए।
कागज तूने हवा में छोड़ दिया।
जो
नहीं
अरे क्या है? इसे समझ में
वीडियो तो
अरे क्या है?
चल कोई नहीं।
उसका कड़ा निकाल लो, उसका हाथ से कड़ा निकाल के बेच दिया।
एक बार
क्या बोला उसने? क्या बोला उसने? किसका? मैंने उसमें लिमिट समझ ही नहीं
होने दे। चल बात चल बात चल
देखने को दे तेरा
ऐसे नहीं अच्छा दे।
3 मिनट के लिए 3 अलग पेपर आए। अरे जहाँ बैठ जा रहे हैं मेरा बैग गिर रहा है बार-बार। अरे साले
माधव से साथ में पढ़ ले तू कहना बोलो तो छोड़ दूंगा
दे
अबे खाली में दो
चालू है ज्यादा गाली
एक मिनट दे चूचे वाले की फैन क्या है क्या क्या कर रहा है साले के पॉडकास्ट
अरे मैं कुछ पीला ही नहीं।
भाई ये देख क्या चल रहा है भाई
अबे ओपन जिप अबे ये डाल
अबे ये क्या चल रहा है इधर लास्ट में इसमें अच्छा चल रहा है तुमको
ये
आज सुधर
तेरे लिए आया हूं आगे
हां तो नहीं बस चाप
बैग गिरा उसको खत्म।
अबे तू बात कर
हां
ए छोड़
साले खाना क्या
मैं फिर कर लूंगा तू
मैं भी तेरा
एक छोड़े
अरे मत रे ऐसे सब गंदी चीजें मत करो
ना
शर्ट पे लगाई
टी-शर्ट पे उसको दाग लगा दे तेल का पूरा पूरा अरे अरे भाई क्या तेल लगा दिया कसम से
और ये लगा
और ये
लगा
और ये
क्या क्या ना
दूसरे की शर्ट और अरे
ब्रो फॉर रियल
नहीं
इसका था इसका था
इससे साफ करा
अरे
अबे वो उसका अकाउंट है ये
चालू है
ओ भाई भैया को हेल्प करने जा रहा है बड़ा
अभी क्या छोले क्या खा रहे हो
ए
बिल स्टॉप विराट विराट निकल जाते हैं अरे ओए